SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by Olive Juice 28. Chapter 53. Aloha. The relaxing strains of what could only be described as island music filled the room as the 8th years took part in a rather impromptu luau on the 3rd Saturday in May. Dean and Hermione had decided it would be fun to introduce their housemates to the flexibility-challenging game of limbo, which turned into a brainstorming session for a full-out themed party. Hermione had visited French Polynesia once when she was still in primary school, so she was familiar with the bright colors, tropical fruits, and cheerful tunes often present in such a locale. Dean's family had actually traveled to Hawaii the summer after his 2nd year, and had attended a luau, complete with hula dancing and a roasted pig. Hermione was thrilled to organize the little event, and was using it as a personal celebration of sorts. She had decided to take Professor McGonagall's advice, and not make any major decisions until she had gone to see her parents again, which lifted the stressful burden on her shoulders considerably. She also came to the stark realization that spending every available moment studying for her NEWT exams was wearing her out and sucking all the joy out of her last weeks in the castle. She didn't want to end her time at the ancient school with only memories of the library and endless pages of textbooks. Either she knew the information by now, or she didn't, and losing sleep and quality time with her friends and boyfriend over it wasn't going to do any good. She would still study, of course, just not to the maniacal extent she had been. This party was her way of giving herself permission to simply enjoy what was left of her final year at Hogwarts. All the other housemates had been told to wear something summery, to come hungry, and having stretched their muscles. Dean had gone down to the kitchens with some pictures he had had his sister send over their vacation, to show the house elves the kinds of food typically found at a luau. He told them to forego the actual pig, but they were more than happy to provide kebabs, chicken with long rice, various fruits and vegetables, mango bread, and even kulolo for dessert. He had also taken it upon himself to make piña coladas and hollowed-out coconuts with little umbrellas speared through the pineapple slices and cherries, though without the traditional rum, since Muggle liquor stores weren't exactly abundant in Hogsmeade. As dinner time drew near, the 8th years began to gather in the colorfully decorated common area. Hermione greeted each of her friends with a flowered lei that, once slipped over their heads, transformed whatever shirt or dress they were wearing to one with a very bright floral pattern. Dean passed straw hats out to all the wizards, while Hermione gave each witch a single hibiscus to put in their hair. Hannah, of course, demanded multiple pictures be taken before anyone was allowed to sit down at the food-laden table, which had been magically enlarged in order to hold everything the elves had served up. Lively conversation flowed as everyone tried the various dishes, and Dean even prepared a bit of trivia about island life, since none of the other witches or wizards around the table had ever been to Hawaii, nor was anyone besides Hermione familiar with the surfing or golf or zip-lining, all of which are popular activities there. Thea was particularly fascinated by the concept of strapping oneself to a cable and zooming through the tropical forest. "But there's no magic?" he asked for the 3rd time, his eyes wide. "Nothing to keep them from falling?" "That's the whole point of the cables and harness," Dean repeated patiently. "That's just mental!" Theo exclaimed. "No more than flying around on brooms," Hermione interjected. "There's an even greater risk with that, since there's nothing keeping you on it except for your own hands." She shuddered at the thought, still quite firm in her resolve not to ride one ever again. Draco scoffed. "You have complete control over your broom, though, unlike the zipper thing." "Zip-lining," corrected Hermione. "Whatever." He waved a hand in the air. "It's much safer to know who's in control than to blindly put your trust in some giant rope strung between the trees." Dean was full out laughing now, knowing he'd never convince his friends that the adventurous activity was perfectly safe, and fervently hoping there would come a day when perhaps they'd get to actually do something like that together. He was just about to suggest such a thing when the door to the room opened, and Bill and Fleur entered, greeting everyone with warm smiles and curious glances, seeing the unique dinner spread out before them. "We're having a luau," Neville announced, and immediately 2 extra chairs were added to the table so their head of house and his beautiful wife could join them. "This looks amazing!" Fleur exclaimed as a place setting appeared before her, and she began helping herself to some of the coconut pudding directly in front of her. Bill grinned at everyone and started filling his own plate while speaking. "We didn't come here expecting dinner, but your little celebration is the perfect time for us to share some exciting news." He paused, and 10 pairs of eyes fixed on him, Draco being the only one containing a knowing glint. Fleur and I are going to be welcoming the newest member of the Weasley clan this November. If possible, Bill's smile grew even wider, and Fleur beamed beside him. The 8th years were on their feet in an instant, hollering congratulations, clapping and cheering, each wanting to show their support for the young couple with hugs and handshakes. As they all made their way back to their seats, Hermione turned to Draco and whispered, "This is why he's having you as his assistant, isn't it?" "Yes," he admitted with a slightly sheepish look. "I hope you're not upset I didn't tell you. He'd asked me not to." "Oh, no, I completely understand. I rather thought it might be the reason, but I didn't want to ask and put you in a bad spot." Hermione sighed happily. "It's so exciting. Molly is going to be over the moon." Dinner continued until bellies were stuffed and plates were emptied, but as everyone was leaning lazily back in their chairs, Dean stood and waved his wand, and a large bag came zooming out of his room. It landed with a soft thud on the floor next to him, and he reached in to pull out what looked like an armful of... "Hay?" Anthony asked, confused. "Are we thatching a roof?" Padma joked. "Or feeding a new pet of Hagrid's?" Hannah chuckled. "Nope," Dean grinned. He spread his arms to show the pile was actually a connected string of long, straw-like fringe. He shook it out a little, and then wrapped it around his waist, tying it in the back. "It's a grass skirt." Amused laughter circled the table as the former Gryffindor turned in a slow circle, waving his arms out to the sides. When he was facing them again, he bent down and retrieved more grass skirts from the bag and began handing them out while explaining. "We're going to learn a traditional hula dance, so everyone put one on." The housemates scurried about, getting their skirts from Dean and lining up in front of the fireplace, where the floor space had been cleared for the evening's activities. Even Bill and Fleur were game to try and put the straw accessories on. Dean knew he'd never be able to imitate a traditional hula in any way that his friends would learn it, so he had rigged up the television and DVD player once again, this time with a how-to video of a Polynesian dance. "Wait," said Daphne. "Isn't the hula what Blaze was doing at the party at Harry's? During the charades game?" Everyone snickered at the memory of the normally poised pureblood attempting to demonstrate the Muggle hobby. "That was a hula hoop," Hermione explained, "but the movement is similar." "All right," Dean hollered. "Everyone spread out a little. Give yourself some room." With that said, he pushed the play button, and immediately the screen was taken up with a beautiful beach scene, while ukulele music filled the air. As the camera panned across the crashing waves and white sand, 3 young women came into view, all wearing traditional costumes of grass skirts, brightly colored bandeau tops, flowered leis around their necks, and others circled around their heads, wrists, and ankles. A collective gasp of appreciation rippled through the gathered group, with murmured comments regarding how pretty the dancers were and how breathtaking the environment. The woman in the center started speaking, instructing the viewers to place their hands specifically, and 12 magical people followed suit. The next hour was as hilarious as it was educational. Theo came to the disappointing revelation that his hips simply don't move that way, and though not for lack of trying. Padma kept getting tangled up in her grass skirt, and Neville announced he'd never felt more uncoordinated in his life, which was saying something. Luna, unsurprisingly, mastered the technique almost immediately, and spent the second half of the lesson weaving in between her friends and giving helpful hints. However, no matter how much she tried to get Theo to sway and bend, the lanky brunette was all stiff angles and spastic motions. Even simply holding his arms out in a relaxed fashion was a challenge, and he looked more like a cartoon mummy than a native islander. By the end of the instructional video, everyone's food had been sufficiently digested, and the limbo poles were brought out. Hermione explained the rules and placed the bar on the topmost rung of a parallel stand. The notch was high enough that even Draco and Neville, who were the tallest, only had to bend their knees the slightest bit in order to make it under. They cranked the music up and the fun began. It wasn't until the 5th round that things started to get tricky, when the bar was low enough that most of the housemates had to lean back at a 45-degree angle, their knees bent and feet splayed to keep their balance. Anthony, to everyone's shock, was the first to be eliminated. He had misjudged how much lower the bar was since his previous turn, and wound up bumping his forehead on it. He flopped onto the rug, groaned good-naturedly before getting up and helping himself to another fruity drink while he cheered his mates on. At the 8th round, only Hermione, who was the shortest, Luna, who was the most flexible, and Daphne, who had incredible balance and core strength, were left. By that point, Draco had commandeered a decorative ukulele and was strumming tunelessly, while Dean, Hannah, Neville, and Padma were all still working on their hula skills. Theo and Anthony were discussing the merits of tiny umbrellas and whether or not they'd be something Bowtruckles or Pixies would use, and Bill was contentedly watching his students from the couch, where his wife had dozed off with her head on his shoulder. "Oof!" Hermione huffed out as she lost her balance and landed on the rug. "I'm out." Daphne helped her up, and they lowered the bar once more. Luna managed to float under it with mere inches between herself and the floor, while Daphne got about a third of the way under it before wobbling and landing on her backside. "Luna wins!" Dean announced, brandishing a whole pineapple as her prize, and turning to count the number of notches the bar had been lowered. 9 notches means 9 points, which puts you in the lead. Congratulations! Everyone cheered except for Theo, who let out an incredulous, "What?" while Luna smiled serenely and kissed him on the cheek as he gaped at the points chart where he no longer held first place. "Don't worry, mate." Draco came over and clapped him on the shoulder. "I'm sure you can come back next week." Everyone laughed, knowing how very competitive Theo was, but also knowing he would never hold it against Luna if she wound up beating him in the end. As everyone started moving the couches and chairs back to their regular places, Bill raised his hand to get their attention, not wanting to yell and wake Fleur. The housemates quietly gathered around him, and he smiled appreciatively. "Thanks. She's just been a little more tired than usual lately." His affectionate gaze rested on his sleeping wife for a second, before turning back to his students. "Just a couple of announcements before we take our leave. For starters, Professor McGonagall wanted me to remind you that your NEWT exams will take place the second week of June, so 3 weeks from Monday." He let his news sink in for a moment, and then went on. "Also, she has decided that instead of just the traditional leaving feast the 3rd Friday of June, she wants to have an actual ceremony, a graduation or commencement, if you will, for all the 7th and 8th years." This announcement brought a greater response than the first. There had never been a graduation at Hogwarts before, and it was highly unlike their no-nonsense headmistress to suggest such a thing. "Did she say why?" asked Hermione. Bill nodded. "She thinks we should celebrate more accomplishments, especially in the wake of last year. I think she is more attached to all of you than she would ever admit. I also think she feels like you 10 in particular deserve to be recognized for coming back and completing your education. I happen to agree." He grinned at them, and they responded in kind. "Will you give us more details soon?" Padma asked. "Or let us know if there's anything we can do to help with the preparations." "Absolutely," Bill said. "I know she's going to let each of you invite a small number of guests, and I'm sure she will want a luncheon or reception to follow the ceremony. If you're willing to pitch in, I know she'd appreciate it." "Of course!" Hannah exclaimed, with the others nodding in agreement. "Brilliant! I'll let her know." Bill shifted in his seat, causing Fleur to slowly wake. She blinked a few times, took stock of the students sitting nearby, and smiled sheepishly. "Forgive me. I have much less energy than usual." She chuckled and stretched before standing. "Thank you for the lovely dinner. If it is all right, I will make a plate for snacks later, yes?" Her sparkling blue eyes roved the group, asking for permission. "Help yourself," Hermione greeted to the table, still laden with food. And she walked beside Fleur as she made her way over. This seemed to spur several others on the discovery of their need for more tropical treats, and soon the group was gathered around, grazing on fruits, guava cakes, and the macadamia nut cookies. "We could have something here," Padma was glancing around the common area. "A reception or tea after the graduation." "We could do a themed party," suggested Neville. "Or a dessert buffet," added Draco. "I'm sure whatever you lot come up with, it will be fantastic," Bill said encouragingly. "Just make sure to keep McGonagall informed of your plans." He looked down, mildly surprised, as Fleur was placing a heaping plate of fruit in his hands, apparently for him to carry back to the chambers. "Got enough here, love?" he teased. Fleur tossed her silver hair from her shoulder and shrugged, a tiny smirk twitching at her mouth as she picked up a second plate and started piling puddings on it. Bill just shook his head and followed her to the door once she was done. "Good night, all," he hollered as they let the door swing shut behind them. The 8th years returned to the discussion about their upcoming graduation festivities, and while a wide variety of suggestions were made and multiple opinions given, they were all in agreement that they wanted this event to be the most memorable yet.